It's no secret that the indie gaming scene is popping off nowadays. We've gotten to a point where the proliferation of technology has made it a possibility for a small team, or even a single person for that matter, to put out a video game. And not just functional ones, but good ones, great ones even. We're seeing the revival of fairly dormant game styles as savvy gamers have gotten more and more fed up with waiting and have finally just said, screw it, I'll do it myself. One such genre, or more accurately subgenre, is the boomer shooter. It's funny to think that only a few years ago it was a rarity to get these throwback FPS games. So much so that Strafe was pretty much sold on the novelty of old school graphics alone, and that was only 2017. That couldn't be further from the truth nowadays, as it seems like these boomer shooters are coming out every other day, which is great, and I'm super happy that's the case. However, I can't help myself from wanting something more. You see, while I enjoy fast-paced quote-unquote old-school FPS games like Quake and Unreal, they're not my favorite. That distinction would have to go to Half-Life and games modeled after it. Unfortunately, Half-Likes have not met the same saturation level that boomer shooters have. Not by a long shot. Still, that doesn't mean they don't exist, and I'm going to share some of the better ones I've come across. I'll throw the criteria on the screen if you don't know what makes up a Half-Like, but in all reality, it's just an easier way of saying late 90s to early 2000s FPS design. Truth be told, the games on display today are more inspired by Half-Life 2 than its predecessor, though if you think I'm going to call them Half-Life 2 likes, you need to get your head checked. I think it's somewhat appropriate to start with a title that I would categorize as a mixed bag. G-String, like most standalone Source games, started its journey as a Half-Life 2 mod and the vision of a single person. It continued to morph and change in scope, and after 12 years put into the project, it manifested as a full-fledged release onto Steam. The game is simultaneously the most similar to a Half-Life title and the most dissimilar. The reason it's extremely close to a Half-Life title is because it's literally built on one. And in terms of combat, very little has changed from Half-Life 2. However, it's dissimilar because the game is completely insane, but in a good way. Playing as Myo, you'll experience the desolate horrors of the game's vision of the future. It makes Blade Runner seem like a summer resort. It's absolutely miserable. Nothing works, nothing is clean, and when I say it's not clean, it's fucking horrific. The amount of muck you traverse in this game is unbelievable. Most signs of the non-hostile human population can be heard via screams. The second most common are resistance fighters, who aren't exactly the plucky underdogs from something like Half-Life 2, more like miserable cretins who picked up a gun because they didn't have anything better to do. The rare civilians you come across are doubled over in either physical pain or hopeless depression.
Thank you, Harold. Oh, I don't feel so good. I think that meat was bad.
The story is, well, I don't really know. Like, things definitely happen. It's not boring or anything, but I don't necessarily know what's truly going on. That being said, I don't think it's a negative. It can be, but in this case, the developer definitely knew what they were doing. The basic setup is you're some kind of genetic freak being experimented on.
But I'm a genetic freak, and I'm not normal!
The most surface level aspect of that is you have telekinesis and some basic pyrokinesis. However, it's very clear there's something else going on. After this guy blows some terrorists out of the sky, the space debris lands on the facility you're being held in, and you escape. With hints of the bigger picture, this is enough to keep me going, even when the game never really explains itself. Where the mixed bag aspect manifests itself is in the pacing of the game. It's not uncommon to go extremely long stretches without getting into any kind of meaningful combat. This would be fine, but G-String doesn't really replace these empty spaces with anything. Puzzles are rare, and when they do show up, they're typically just basic physics stuff. And the only other thing you'll run into is the game's failure to draw your eye to where you're actually supposed to go. I feel like there really could have been a lot of tightening up, as on top of the inconsistent pace, it runs a little long for what it has to offer. The other games on this list are extremely short, clocking in between 3 to 4 hours, but G-String runs 12, which I mean on the face of it isn't a bad thing, but I'd have to say it doesn't earn that length. Still, at the end of the day, what kept me going was the unique vision the game offered, and this staggering amount of attention to detail. The developer's passion is so clearly on display that even if it's a little messy, it's still worth checking out. Okay, let's mellow it out a little. If G-String punches above its weight, Red Alliance plays it pretty safe. Not to say it isn't impressive, the sheer fact of making an actual worthwhile product as a single person will always be impressive to me. Red Alliance wears its inspiration on its sleeve and pretty much displays all the hallmarks of the games it's trying to emulate. It almost plays like the greatest hits of mid-2000s game design. The obligatory vehicle section, optional stealth, and the scary zombie part all make an appearance. While these have the potential to be a bore, here they're done with a clear level of understanding on how to make these elements be fun and not merely just a checklist. Combat is fun, albeit basic. The weapons are punchy, but the AI isn't very dynamic. They'll either make a beeline towards you or just hunker down, refusing to move. It's clear the game wants you to take it a little slower than your average half-like, and you're better off using cover as much as possible. To this end, I think the game would have strongly benefited from a lean feature, as the game forces you to be what I like to call a corner creep.
Because we're corner creeps. Do you know how to corner creep? You ever corner creep before in your life?
I got arrested.
Where it almost feels like you're abusing the geometry instead of what the game intended. In terms of quality of life improvements, I think the weapon system could have used a rework. Each weapon type has a certain slot, and only one of that type can be held at a time. So like pistols in the pistol slot, rifles in the rifle slot, etc, etc. That being said, I really wish you could just mix and match because this game is quite stingy on ammo. Not really a problem for me. I like having to make every bullet count and scrounging for supplies. It does become a problem though when it comes to guns with different ammo types. The enemies you fight 90% of the time only drop the basic assault rifle rounds, and the game hardly ever stashes the other ammo types around the environment. Meaning using weapons with uncommon ammo puts you at a supreme disadvantage, so you'll end up with a pretty similar loadout for the whole game. This isn't an extreme problem, but I think it's the game's biggest attraction. Red Alliance clearly uses a lot of store-bought assets, but I think people often misinterpret the use of those as a net negative, even when they're used correctly. There's a clear understanding here on constructing appealing environments, and not just a hodgepodge of random shit thrown together, and in my opinion, they all look very nice. Use of environmental effects and lighting are all on point, and it's very clear from looking at it that this is no asset flip. The story is extremely basic and doesn't really make complete sense. However, it's clear that the developer knew this, and instead of trying to represent it as something epic, they realized the constraints of what they had to work with, and the whole thing is tongue-in-cheek. The enemy faction is literally called the Oppressive Units.
Nobody wants to stay in the country when we have oppressive units after us.
The developer was not taking this very seriously, and it's definitely a good thing he wasn't. As the quality of the voice acting is a bit, well...
Jesus Christ, walk a little bit faster, why don't you? Oh, I just found out that you arrived. How did the mission go? Did you get the intel?
I mean, even the recording quality is a bit hit and miss, with Dr. Gray in particular really needing to step away from the mic a little bit.
Now, I want all of the prisoners in this room, now! Put all the failures of the mind control in the prison. They can rot there.
Yes, boss.
Fantastic. Now ship this one off to prison. He's clearly broken.
All the shortcomings aren't as humorous, however, as the stability of the game ebbs and flows. It's just not well optimized, and the frames tend to dip when there's a lot going on. It's definitely worth lowering some of the graphics options just to have the thing run a bit smoother. Other than that, I think it's a really quaint, fun little game. On a technical level, it's probably the worst of the bunch, but honestly, it's very nearly my favorite one. I think it does an extremely good job of capturing that particular era of gaming without feeling derivative. What the fuck is an ADACA? Well, apparently it means something in Marathi, but for the non-Marathi people, it's a video game aping Half-Life 2, because it does the gravity gun, and the combine, and the Raven home, and we can't forget about the plucky rebels. Still, it's got some of its own tricks up its sleeve, the most obvious of which is the art style. It sports a far more cartoonish look than its inspiration, but in turn this really allows the game to maintain a very nice looking visual style without piling on the workload. On top of that, environments are far more open. If I'd have to categorize it, I'd say they're bigger than Half-Life 2 but smaller than Halo. With this increase in size comes an increase in pace. It's a lot faster than Half-Life 2, and one huge quality of life improvement is the fact that using the gravity gun equivalent is now just bound to right-clicking instead of having to switch to a separate weapon. This is a godlike move, and this single change makes the gameplay flow so much better. However, what would a shooter be without its guns? And ADACA by far has the most variety of the games in this video. There are multiple factions, and they each have different weapons to offer. Not to mention, exploring and going off the beaten path will often allow you to find some rare weapons. From basic firearms to more interesting stuff, you'll have to contend with a 2-weapon limit, but it actually works to the game's benefit, as it encourages you to constantly try new guns, and there's definitely enough of them here to make that dynamic work. The story is basic, but it works. You wake up on an alien planet you were meant to colonize, but your hibernation pod malfunctioned, and you're the last person to wake up. You band with the colonizers turned rebels and fight your oppressors. Blah blah blah, you get the gist. There's a surprising amount of time dedicated to this, as talking with friendly NPCs is a fairly common occurrence. There's no actual voice acting, as it opts for the Animal Crossing style of speech. It's all pretty boilerplate, but it moves the story along well enough and it doesn't overstay its welcome. It's definitely a good game, and I was originally going to end the video with it, given its quality and the fact that it's the most recent release. But I was hit with a nasty surprise at the end of the game when I found out it's missing an entire episode. Despite the fact that it came out of early access and it doesn't say anything to the contrary, the game isn't done yet. Look, I've got no problem with an early access approach. Still, I just want to wait until the game is completely finished, as I'd rather play through all the content in one go. So it's incredibly annoying when I'm essentially tricked into playing an unfinished game. There is a non-linear open world-esque mode as well, which I'm sure adds a lot of value, and maybe when I have some more time, I'll go back and play it. But the fact is, I only came here for the campaign. And to be fair, it's around the same length as Red Alliance and the next game I'll be covering. That being said, I still can't really bring myself to recommend an unfinished product. Okay, definitely my favorite of the bunch. I feel like Industria takes a more chill approach. Definitely feels less arcadey than the rest of the games, and even in the visual and sound department, there's a certain beautiful quality to it all. The story is of great importance this time around, so I feel I better start with that. After Nora is awoken with a phone call by her significant other Walter, we learn some very important things very quickly. First of all, it's East Berlin and the wall is coming down. This would be good news if it weren't for Atlas. Some kind of thing, we don't really know what it is yet, but something's going wrong with it and Walter is attempting to do something with it. However, it's clear that he doesn't think he's gonna see Nora again. After rushing over there, we follow in Walt's footsteps and are teleported to a place called Hakovic. Our main goal is to find Walter, while also trying to piece together what's happening. Along the way, we meet a helpful aide in the form of Brent, and that's basically the whole setup. The game is a lot more preoccupied with its story as well as graphical fidelity, which I have to say it does both quite well. The story is extremely intriguing and always leaves you wanting more. And not to mention the environmental storytelling is also spot on. On top of that, the graphics are really good. As far as I know, this is only a 2-person team, so what they were able to accomplish here is downright staggering. With the focus in these other places, however, it's clear that the combat wasn't the overall goal here. Even on hardcore, the game is quite easy. Save for one combat arena towards the end of the game, I never died once, and I had plenty of ammo and health to spare the entire time. Let's just say you don't need to spend any time on FPS Trainer for this one. I think that's completely okay though, as I'd rather play a game that is kind of easy as opposed to an unfair one. In fact, what I think the game does here is quite brilliant. If this were trying to be an adventure game or walking simulator and still be interesting, it would have to bring in quite a few more elements than I think the developers could handle. That being said, since they made a game with really nice environments and an intriguing story, with some well done, albeit basic FPS gameplay, it keeps the whole thing chugging along at a nice pace. Although speaking of chugging, one big complaint I have to level at the game is once again optimization. FPS is all over the place, and while this game does look good, my PC should be able to handle it fine. I eventually put the game's settings towards performance, which didn't have that noticeable of a hit on the graphics, and it ran a lot better. Also, for me at least, the game runs even worse on DirectX 12 for whatever reason. Other than that, I think the game's great. I pretty much got nothing but praise for it. And if you're gonna only play one of the games on this list, make sure it's this one. Well, there we go. Some Half-Likes I have personally enjoyed. Like I said earlier, there aren't a whole lot of these coming out right now, but I know for a fact that's gonna be changing soon. If you look at the trajectory of the indie market, you can see the evolution of what games they're being inspired by. In fact, as I'm writing this, Trepang 2 has just released. And while that's clearly inspired by Fear is clearly inspired by Half-Life. So it's a Half-Like adjacent, I guess. Really, I think the indie scene is an amazing place right now, and I definitely see it just going up from here. So I just wanted to take a break from my usual content and just put some small projects I think are cool on display. My next video will be more traditional, but I hope you enjoyed this nonetheless.